While researching for my videos, I'm always amazed at the audacity with which the West has taken the right to intervene in other countries' business. This hypocrisy of proclaiming sovereignty and the right of self-determination of peoples on the one hand, but disregarding this very sovereignty on the other hand. And the price for a remarkably high degree of audacity and hypocrisy is won in our present case by the USA, which, based on the Monroe Doctrine, considered the entire Western Hemisphere as its own, even calling Latin and South America the USA's backyard, which it wanted to keep capitalistically pure. In their anti-communist mania, governments were overthrown countless times, dictators supported, young democracies destroyed, and thus destabilizing the entire continent to such an extent that civil wars have become a normal occurrence. With the exception of Costa Rica, virtually all Latin American countries had at least one experience with a United States-supported dictator. However, it is a fact of history that there are always movements or individuals who oppose the imperial power and do not want to put up with the intervention. One of these revolutionaries who vehemently opposed any American interference summarized his anger in this way: "No country has the right to tell us what to do or how to run our country, or who to be friendly with. We certainly would not attempt to tell any other country what to do. We are not in anybody's backyard. And we are definitely not for sale. Anybody who thinks they can bully us or threaten us clearly has no understanding, idea, or clue as to what material we are made of." Maurice Bishop had had enough of the arrogance of the USA. He saw how around him the CIA directly or indirectly sabotaged socialist movements, not because they harmed the people. Oh no, on the contrary, the USA did not care. It was about their claim of ownership in their backyard, and they did not want to see anything red there. Although Bishop saw what happened when US influence was denied, he was brave enough to initiate a socialist revolution in Grenada. The experiment ended, unfortunately, with his assassination and the US invasion of the small island nation. What remains is his story, which is what we will focus on today. Born in 1944 in Dutch Aruba and moved to Grenada at 6 years old, Maurice Bishop came into contact with the history of Grenadian resistance to colonial powers at a young age. Around 150 years earlier, Julien Fédon led a slave rebellion against British and French exploitation. He failed, but his legend lived on among the exploited. Indeed, Fédon is not an isolated case. The spirit of resistance to exploitation, enslavement, and foreign domination never slept in Latin and South America and would soon animate the young Maurice. Maurice was an excellent student who saw the spirit of revolution and Caribbean nationalism spreading around him. All over Latin and South America, people were longing for change. One event in the Caribbean was particularly inspiring for Maurice: the revolution in Cuba, which made possible what so many did not believe was possible: resistance to US intervention, which even attempted to overthrow the socialist government with the invasion in the Pig Bay. This demonstration of resilience against external imperialist pressures inspired oppressed peoples worldwide, and especially in the Caribbean, to stand up for freedom and self-determination. As a result, the Black Power Revolution occurred in Trinidad and Tobago. J.D. Chagan pushed for independence in Guyana, and Michael Manley implemented socialist reforms in Jamaica. But what about the small island nation of Grenada and its 100,000 inhabitants? Yes, things were beginning to heat up here too. Maurice Bishop returned from his law studies in London in 1970 and founded a law practice in St. George, the capital. He publicly started opposing the current autocratic Grenadian government of Eric Gary, who was increasingly oppressing the people. Bishop began to become more and more politically involved and brought together the various opposition parties, which would henceforth be united under the name New Jewel Movement. As the saying goes, diamonds are forever. The movement was clearly a Marxist-Leninist party dedicated to the liberation of the Grenadian people from economic hardship, social injustice, and neo-colonial influence. The dictatorial Gary wanted to get rid of the growing opposition, and to silence unwanted criticism, Gary often sent out his ruthless mongoose gang of thugs. What followed were 2 days in Grenada's history that would become known as Bloody Sunday and Bloody Monday. Both days would illustrate the ruthlessness and harshness of the Gary regime. And even though Bishop and his comrades were horribly beaten up by the mongoose gang on Bloody Sunday and were also imprisoned, Bloody Monday was probably the worst day for Bishop, as he lost his father, Rupert Bishop, in a mass demonstration against Gary. Rupert was leading women and children away from the danger and was himself shot and killed. On February 6, 1974, Grenada was able to proclaim independence after about 300 years of foreign rule. This was probably only possible because Gary had good relations with the United States and the United Kingdom, and these big brothers did not have to fear an ideological change and therefore a loss of influence in Grenada. Gary was now the first post-independent prime minister, but his reign was characterized by corruption, political repression, and a disregard for civil rights. Where was Bishop? Maurice Bishop had to spend the day of the Declaration of Independence in prison, a security measure taken by Gary, who feared a coup attempt. However, Gary could not get rid of Bishop. Bishop, with his New Jewel movement, now became the strongest opposition force against Gary in Parliament and just waited for the right moment. Then, on March 13, 1979, the time had come. Eric Gary had supposedly ordered his mongoose gang to take care of Bishop once and for all, so that he would not get any stupid ideas. But by the time it was already too late. Maurice Bishop outran the mongoose gang, and while Gary was away for a UN conference, Bishop and fellow revolutionaries seized control of the government. They proclaimed a new Marxist government modeled after Fidel Castro's Cuba, with Maurice Bishop as prime minister. Bishop asked his childhood friend Bernard Court to become his deputy prime minister, and his revolutionary comrade Jacques Kraft, with whom he had a relationship and a child, became Minister of Education. That coup was almost bloodless, and the people preferred the new revolutionary government under the charismatic leader Bishop over the neo-colonial puppet Gary. So the revolutionary experiment started, and it would last for 4.5 years. Maurice and the revolutionary government followed a socialist policy. Women's rights, workers' rights, anti-racism, and quality life for all were among the priorities. It's always funny to see that that's called socialist, even though it's just human rights. Anyways, they sought to build a society that favored the great majority of people. The government built schools, led a huge literacy campaign, sought to develop the countryside and provide employment to the people. Thanks to the efforts of the revolutionary government, in 4 years the unemployment rate dropped from 49% to just 14%. But their accomplishments extended even further. In the minds of the people, they started to overcome their trauma of colonial and neo-colonial servitude and degradation. Also, thanks to the Black Power movement, the inferiority complex instilled by white colonialism was countered by a mentality of pride and power. Maurice Bishop was known as a great speaker and popular with the people because of his grassroots politics. He was the head and face of the revolution. His vision for Grenada was of a small country standing tall and proud in the Caribbean region and in the world community. He was also an internationalist and saw imperialism as the cause of many problems in the world.
Unemployment, hunger, malnutrition, disease, illiteracy. These are the crimes and the sins that are visited upon the poor developing countries of the third world, while the industrialized countries continue to exploit our resources.
The Grenadian Revolution radiated all over the world and caused a sensation, especially in the USA. In the Western Hemisphere, there was now a second socialist revolution besides Cuba. In fact, the Sandinista revolution against the Somoza dictatorship also began in Nicaragua in the same year. But the revolution in Grenada was viewed more closely in the United States, because in Grenada they spoke English, and the revolutionary socialist messages could therefore be easily understood in the US. Moreover, the majority of the Grenadian population was black. The fear existed in the USA that the approximately 30 million black people in the USA could be animated by the revolutionary ideas of freedom and equality. To prevent this, and following the Monroe Doctrine, according to which the spread of Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere should be prevented, the US now began to intervene in Grenada. After all, they had already had plenty of experience with other South and Latin American countries. The USA began to sabotage in different areas, so they arranged that on the one hand, the International Monetary Fund and other credit institutes would withhold credits to Grenada. In addition, the media draw increasingly a wrong picture of Grenada as an ally of the Soviet Union. According to that, Grenada planned to build a Soviet submarine base and would have received weapons and combat airplanes from the Soviets. In short, they tried everything to justify a military intervention. They don't do it differently today. Libya. Maurice Bishop actually pursued a non-aligned policy and wanted to maintain good relations with both the USA and the Soviet Union. These campaigns and attempts at sabotage worsened when Reagan took over as president in the United States. In fact, by 1981, plans were already underway to overthrow Bishop and invade the microstate. Reagan mobilized over 120,000 troops, 250 warships, and 1,000 aircraft to Vieques, an island that is part of Puerto Rico, for a mock invasion. They codenamed the operation Amber and Amberines because Grenada's official name is Grenada and the Grenadians. This was so ridiculously obvious. Since tourism was an important project for Bishop, he initiated the construction of an international airport on the island in 1983. Money for it came from a wide variety of countries, Europe, Canada, as well as Cuba and the Soviets. Reagan announced it would be a Soviet-Cuban military base. Oh, and besides, there would be a danger to American citizens and foreigners on the island. Right out of the "How do I justify military intervention in a country whose style of government I don't like" manual. But it was not only from the outside that danger threatened. There was also unrest within the party's own ranks. Bishop's childhood friend and fellow party member Bernard Court began to stage a mutiny in early October 1983. Court and his followers invoked the very pure Marxist-Leninist doctrine and accused Bishop of personality cult and of turning away from the norms and methods of Leninist leadership. They placed Bishop under house arrest for the time being. But Court probably did not count on the support Bishop had among the people. Thousands of people now took the streets in support of Bishop. Students walked out of lecture halls chanting "No Bishop, no classes," and dock workers began a strike. On the night of October 19th, a crowd waved banners with the slogan "We want Bishop, not Court." The crowd flocked to Bishop's house and released him from house arrest. Now all could have been well again. But no. Demonstration ended at an army barracks. What exactly happened here is unclear, but what is certain is that Maurice Bishop was executed here together with his partner and education minister Jacqueline Kraft. To this day, the bodies are missing. Maurice Bishop was only 39 years old. Only a few minutes later, the radio station Radio Free Grenada announced that the military council had taken power. That was the cue Reagan had been waiting for. The coup served as a pretext for the US to finally intervene in Grenada. The US government coldly exploited the internal destabilization and ensuing confusion in Grenadian society. Just 6 days after Bishop's shooting, the US Army entered Grenada in Operation Fury. For whatever reason Fury, I mean they had been planned this whole thing for 2 years. But they must have wanted to keep up appearances. Reagan said of the invasion,
"Grenada, we were told, was a friendly island paradise for tourism. Well, it wasn't. It was a Soviet-Cuban colony being readied as a major military bastion to export terror and undermine democracy. We got there just in time."
Exactly. Lucky you were just in time with your 7,600 soldiers, an overwhelming amount of troops for the tiny country of about 100,000 people. As you can imagine, little Grenada, which had just lost its leadership, had no way to oppose the American military might. The whole thing lasted 4 days. Then the invasion was over. A government agreeable to the USA was set up, and then they let themselves be celebrated for this victory. It was also absurd. Reagan even proudly proclaimed afterwards, "Now our days of weakness are over." 10 years after the retreat from Vietnam, the USA had defeated one of the smallest countries in the world. When Reagan heard that the UN Security Council strongly condemned the invasion, he responded by saying that this reaction wouldn't spoil his breakfast. Why all the fuss? This disproportionately large invasion was deliberate. It was an effort to dissuade other revolutionary movements in the region from daring to try what Grenada had attempted. But to this day, Grenada's short-lived revolutionary process is still remembered and honored. For 4 years, little Grenada and Maurice Bishop were symbols of the revolution that gave hope to so many other countries. Unfortunately, this is the way of most visionaries who challenge the status quo and attack the old elites. And so Maurice Bishop joins Lumumba, Sankara, Cabral and Machel in the canon of greats who died for their convictions. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing.